like to ask the Minister for Health and Social Care what plans he has to introduce legislation to ensure that people who lack capacity are protected from having decisions made for them that are not in their best interests.
On the Minister for Health and Social Care, Mr Ashford, to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. The introduction of legislation to ensure that the island has in place a modern and clear legal framework which safeguards the rights, dignity and well-being of those who lack the capacity to make decisions for themselves is the key legislative priority for the Department. Much work has already been undertaken by the Department on developing policy. At present, work is being undertaken on a review of the recent legislative changes in England and Wales, whereby the existing deprivation of liberty safeguards are to be replaced with a new system for authorising deprivations of liberty of care. To expedite this, the Department is actively looking to bring in extra resource. That resource will be dedicated solely to working on capacity over the recess period so that finalised drafting instructions can be submitted to by the Department to the Attorney-General's chambers early this coming autumn.
Supplementary, Ms August-Hanson.
Can I ask the Minister if that resource is the same resource that was brought about, that had brought about the principles of drafting and the previous the idea for the bill before it was the changes were undertaken in Westminster? Thank you, Mr President.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. I don't want to preempt it because the discussions are ongoing about bringing in the additional resource. That I will be in a position to confirm to the Honourable Member later next week.
Honourable Member Mrs Beecroft.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Given that this legislation was on the legislative programme and was being given some priority when I was in the department as Minister, could the current Minister explain why there's been such a delay?
Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr President. It's a very simple answer, which is there's been changes within the legislative team of the Department. The Honourable Member for Douglas South will be aware herself from her time as Minister the difficulties that the legislative team within the Department has had. That is why we're bringing in additional resource to move it forward, because as far as I'm concerned as Minister, the capacity legislation is the legislative priority of the Department.
Ms August-Hanson.
Thank you, Mr President. Can I then ask the Minister further to that, whether or not the delay was in part due to the changes that have been made by Westminster following faults that were found in the Mental Capacity Act over that way?
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. That has played a part as well, because we needed to see what the UK was going to do in order to feed that into our system, because obviously we don't want to end up with two systems that are going to be complete and utter polar opposites in that regard, because we do on occasion transfer people to the UK for treatment. The other thing, of course, was that there were various amendments floating around as well to the UK legislation, so we needed to see what the final version of that was going to be. We should now be in a position to be able to assess that and, as I say, bring in additional resource to be able to drive this forward.
Honourable Member Miss Edge.
Thank you, Mr President. I wonder if the Minister could confirm to the Honourable Court when he expects to bring the legislation through to the Honourable Court.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr President. Happy to do so. As I pointed out in my original answer, the plan is for the drafting instructions to be submitted to the Attorney-General's chambers early this coming autumn. So, personally, I would expect the legislation to be within the branches not long after we return from recess.